Welcome to Giants Nation. I'm your host, Bobby Skinner, here with my co-host, the Football Grump. And the New York Giants have fired head coach Brian Daboll and have a plan to retain Joe Schoen and allow him to lead the head coaching search. Grump, we're going to hit this from every angle, right? Like, my mind has honestly been more on the Joe Schoen being retained thing. It really has, right? Which is weird to say after head coach has been fired, but I don't want that to be the focal point of the episode. So we'll hit that more in the back half. I do want to talk about Brian Daboll, why he got fired. Was this the right decision? What led to it? What was he good at? Like all of that stuff. We'll talk about Mike Kafka being the interim offensive coordinator, Shane Bowen staying as defensive coordinator. But what was your initial reaction? Because I set my alarm early this morning. I actually stayed up late last night putting together notes because I thought it was a possibility that Brian Daboll was going to get fired after we finished recording Grump. I asked around, I was like, is there any, this is not going to happen, right? This is just people being mad and wanting it to happen. And a couple of people I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. So I prepared for it. And then when it didn't hit this morning, I was like, all right, we're going to last another week at least. And then around noon, we got the news, Grump. How are you feeling? What was your initial reaction to the news?
So my initial reaction was a little bit of surprise. I wouldn't say total shock, right? I mean, I've been mentally prepared for this for a while. I've had notes kind of put together for this happening because I felt like it was coming at the end of the year no matter what at this point. Of course, this happened when I'm on the road, so all of my notes are at home. So, I mean, they're kind of, they're in my mind. So it like
that's
I
why
said,
you got to go Google Doc Life. I used to be a handwritten note guy too. I went to Google Doc Life. I was holding out. I'm like not going anywhere. I'm like, all right, got to go to the grocery store. Let me get stuff for dinner, and then I'll be back for the press conference at 1:25. Like driving down the road, I get the text from Danny King, Daboll out, and hit a Yui and head back home. So.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have all of my super great prepared notes, but I mean, they're all pretty much in my head. But I think the real, like I said, like you said, we're going to hit on all aspects of this. But the real straw that breaks the camel's back with this particular win is the injury to Jackson Dart. So, I mean, it's another fourth quarter collapse. It's another loss. But I think, even outside of that in a vacuum, there's still precedent for him to remain till the end of the year or, towards the last couple games of the year. Jackson Dart getting concussed in this game and, whatever the individual reason for the concussion may be, whether it's, an unnecessary hit he took or whatever, it's the optics at this point. Nothing looks good. They lose and they lose badly and in bad situations. So it's really not a complete shock that it came after this game.
Yeah, they blew a fourth quarter lead again, and Jackson Dart got injured, right? That, like you said, that does feel like it. Now, I will say this, Grump. Things were put into motion to set this up, right, for Brian Daboll to kind of step into it and then fire it, right? That's why a lot of certain stories came out last week, and I'm not just guessing on this. Stuff was somewhat put into motion of how this was all going to go, right? We, on the post-game recap podcast last week, Grump, I was like, there's a very strong sense that Joe Schoen is safe. And that it's basically what just came out of the Giants press release of, we feel this roster is better than what it has shown this year and that we should be winning more games. But overall, it's not just one game yesterday the reason Brian Daboll was fired. It's because overall he went 20, 40, and 1 as a head coach. That's losing, right? Losses. The last 3 seasons, 11 and 33 over the last 3 seasons, and they flat out did not win. They fired people. They scapegoated certain players, and there was, unfortunately, the only person that Brian Daboll could point at that was left was the guy who had a big part in his firing, and that being Joe Schoen in this. And we'll obviously talk about that. But to quickly chronicle Brian Daboll's tenure as the New York Giants head coach, it started out great. They went 9-7-1, and I don't want to hear all the second half of that season they win. Okay, but they took a roster that was very bad, and they went 9-7-1. They took the Giants to the playoffs. They gave them their only playoff victory since Super Bowl 46. That's the Giants' best season since Eli Manning held a Super Bowl trophy. They re-signed the quarterback, made some additions, and then ran it back. Well, it went terrible the next year, right? Starts off with a 40-0 loss to the Cowboys. They went 6-11. They fired the defensive coordinator, Wink Martindale, as well as his assistants they brought in a fiery, exit. They fired the special team coordinator. They fired the offensive line coach and essentially fired Mike Kafka and took over offensive play calling. Then, after all of those changes, they went 3-14. So they fired the quarterback, blamed all the offensive issues on him, gave back the play calling to the offensive coordinator. All they did was fire the DB coach. Came back, drafted a quarterback who is playing well. That's the crazy thing, is if you said Jackson Dart was playing well, you would have never guessed Brian Daboll would end up being fired. And still, we are 2-8. So it takes more than just having a good quarterback to win games in the NFL. Who knew? Who knew they weren't as close as they were saying? But also,
if I could jump in real quick. So, I mean, it is, as we go through these reasons, it is more than just the fact that they didn't win. I know there's a lot of articles out there. I know Renan's article on ESPN says, like, plain and simple, they didn't win. That's not really the reason. As we talk about Jackson Dart playing well, in John Mara's mandate on, like, he said things needed to look better. He didn't say they needed to win more. I think in some ways this has looked better, but so many things have looked worse that it was more about the things that looked bad than it was necessarily the record. The record's bad. It's the manner in which they lost games this year, and it's just the general optics of this entire season has not been good. It's been, almost individually on players playing well that there's been any sort of aura or whatever, or good juju with the Giants. So continue, Brian Daboll.
Well, and the other thing is, like and subscribe to the show, right? Now that the Giants have a head coach gone, we're going to give you as best a preview of head coaching candidates that we can when the season ends up winding down. We're going to have insider news with our show with Breaking Big Blue, Jordan Renan. But guess what? I'm still putting out a Jackson Dart film breakdown this week. It'll probably come out on Thursday. We're going to do a call-in show, live stream on Thursday. So if you like New York Giants football, this is the one-stop shop. So like and subscribe. But again, but at the end of the day, if they win games, right, and if they were 4-6 and this team is like, say they don't blow the Cowboys in the Broncos game, and they pull it out by the skin of their teeth, right? Like, they don't run that soft zone against the Cowboys, and the Drew Phillips pays attention when Bo Nix overthrows his target, right? They are 4-6 right now and probably have their job, but those two plays should not be the decider of if a head coach is fired. It is the fact that, like you said, they've fired everybody, essentially. They've essentially fired everybody on this staff. They've replaced all the major players on the roster for the most part. And it's still 2-8, right? Like, we spent all offseason being like, I understand they believe they're quarterback away and quarterback makes a big difference, but, like, what are they away from? Being a wild card team, being 7-10? Well, look, not to say that Jackson Dart has played like a top 5 quarterback in the NFL, but he's played like what they said if they got last year, they would have been a winning team, and they're 2-8, right? 2-8 with, the Packers, Lions, and Patriots upcoming on the schedule. So they were not able to find out a way to win. And you know what? Brian Daboll had 6 different quarterbacks, 7 if you include Davis Webb for that one game. None of them had a winning record with him, like Tyrod Taylor, 40%. Tommy DeVito, 37%. Daniel Jones, 34%. Jackson Dart, 28%. Locke, 20%. And then Russ and Webb, 0%. Like, they went from 9 wins to 6 wins to 3 wins, and then now 2-10 games. This season, I do think the way they lost some of those games matters, right? They lose 4 games where they're up by 10-plus points. They lost 3 games where they had a lead with less than 2 minutes to go in the game. They said all they needed was a QB to win games, and guess what? That was not the case for Brian Daboll and his coaching staff.
Oh, yeah. I mean, but like you said, it's so much more than just the losing. But, I mean, it goes without saying. Like, the win totals have been smaller and smaller year after year. And it even goes to, like you were saying, where if they don't lose games against the Cowboys and Broncos late, hell, even throw the additional Bears game in there as well. Let's just say they win all 3 of those games. At a certain point, you look at some of the in-game coaching, like decision-making, and you wonder, like, do you have a coaching advantage at any point? Like, is there anything that he does as a head coach during the game where you're like, in the head-to-head matchup, we have the advantage. Like, is there any game preview where you're like, we have the head coaching advantage because Brian Daboll does something, or do you say it because the other head coach is just simply worse? So I think that there's so much to the win total thing beyond just the general numbers, but the general numbers do tell the story. It started at a mediocre number and it's only gone down since then.
That was the conversation at one point with Brian Daboll, and we'll kind of wrap the bow on the Brian Daboll stuff of when we say like what he was good at. Like, you know what? We said, how did they win 6 games with this team in 2023? Right? That coaching, right? It wasn't just the defense, right? We'll talk about that. Like, I don't think we can throw away what he's done with Jackson Dart. I don't think it's just a given that Jackson Dart was going to look like he looked and have the confidence to start this kid a lot faster than other people in the organization wanted him to. But let's talk about just the past surface level talking points of WFAN, like, he just doesn't know how to win. They don't know how to win. But like, no, let's talk about it. I think professionalism was a big part of this, and that obviously doesn't jive with certain types and big businesses, but losing his composure on the sideline time after time after time became an issue. And it wasn't just him yelling at referees. It was issues with the coach. And this does go back to the Wink Martindale situation. And the Wink Martindale situation is bigger than just 2 guys who don't get along. But, guys complain, like, we couldn't call plays because he's losing his mind on them. And there was basically like the story on all that stuff was like, I understand Wink Martindale gets the big juicy stuff. Kafka's the one who got this the worst, right? He's the one who got the worst, the wrong side of the stick out of all this, to the point where Joe Schoen had to listen in on the headset. It feels like forever ago, but Joe Schoen had to listen in on the headset to find out what was going on. Players had to deal with it on the sideline. That had been tampered down a little bit, especially since Daniel Jones left, but like, that was an issue. The blue tent situation with Jackson Dart against the Eagles. We said it on that mailbag previously. It's like, I think he might have got fired if they didn't win that game. Got fined for over $100,000. That's probably his biggest lack of professionalism issue there was. Coaches said it was never I've done that twice. I did on my reaction. Never ending finger pointing instead of trying to find solutions, the Commanders game in 2023 of, you're going to lose this game just like the Jets game, said the Wink Martindale at the end of that one. He took away Mike Kafka's play calling multiple times mid-game, sometimes taking it for himself, sometimes giving it to Shea Tierney, and then giving it back, right? Not having really a rhyme or reason, but just reacting to the moment. Again, like I said, it's not just scorned Wink Martindale reports. Like, a lot of it was on the offensive side of the ball.
I mean, having a bad relationship with his assistants is one of the biggest reasons, I think, there's, that led to his downfall, because I think it goes beyond a lot of things, right? So you have Mike Kafka's, the quiet one, so he doesn't get the stories, but the Wink Martindale thing is not nothing. The manner in which Wink Martindale left was kind of odd, where they fired his right-hand man to pretty much get him to storm out. Then they blocked Mike Kafka's ability to take a lateral move to go to, I think, Seattle.
Correct.
I would say probably purely based on optics. I don't think that Daboll wanted Mike Kafka around just because he really likes Mike Kafka. I think that he thinks highly of him, maybe, or whatever, but I think that was just so it didn't look like they fired all 3 coordinators and kept the head coach. I would even say that it appeared to me, and this is entirely my opinion, but it just appears to me that, like, Brian Daboll didn't seem to care about coaching the other areas outside of the offense. The offense was his baby. And I say that because you pick completely different defensive coordinators from a schematic and from an aggressiveness standpoint. And it's almost like you just pick somebody based off of, like, ideas, like, stopping the run or bringing pressure, just generic things. And
let's talk
it
about
just doesn't seem like there was a cohesive philosophy that he felt strongly about defensively. It was just picking guys to just run that side of the ball. I don't want to have to think about it kind of situation.
one of my biggest red flags of Brian Daboll early on was the coaching hiring, right? I liked Patrick Graham a lot. I was on board with keeping him. But when they planned to keep him, and by the way, Patrick Graham was bothered by the fact that Brian Daboll said that Patrick Graham is staying and just assumed that he wasn't going to get a head coaching job in that opening press conference. Like, they went to a totally opposite kind of coach. Who's the next best coach? Wink Martindale, right? Not, like you said, not looking for an identity of what he wants in a defense. Just like, all right, well, give me a power rankings of best coaches available. You get Wink Martindale. And again, I like both Wink Martindale and Patrick Graham as a coach. But the biggest one was the Thomas McGahee interview. This came out after the playoffs, right? So it wasn't just like my first red flag. I remember Grump, us in a hotel room at the Senior Bowl, being like, I wish this guy would have got his own special teams coordinator instead of retaining Thomas McGahee and him lasting through a third head coach there. Of Thomas McGahee starts his interview with 5 minutes in, Brian Daboll was like, "You just want the job." Right. So basically just took the word of people who had been there and said, "Oh, yeah, he's a good special teams coach," and then kept him and ended up firing him 2 years later. But the Wink Martindale thing, I think Wink Martindale is a lot to blame for that. I really do. Like, I remember like my feelings in the moment. And I think Wink Martindale had a lot to do with that, because despite Wink Martindale maybe not believing in Brian Daboll, he undercut him multiple times, whether it's through the media or behind closed doors. And I understand why Brian Daboll would be very pissed at that, as all this stuff coming out at the end of the season about how he's a clown and no one believes in him. And I'm just going to let you go, right? I'm just going to fire you and give you your wish. And I understand that level of pettiness, right? I've related to Brian Daboll, even though that's why I'm not I'm not the personality that should be an NFL head coach, because I can relate to Brian Daboll and some of those things. Instead, they put together this plan of, they come out with a press conference 8 a.m. The end of season press conference is never that early, right? But they fired McGahee and Bobby Johnson, right? Like, yep, we plan to keep everything the same. Nope. We fire Wink Martindale's right-hand man, Drew Wilkins, and then his brother, Kevin Wilkins. Wink Martindale has the blow-up, and they kind of get what they want, where Wink Martindale leaves, doesn't officially resign, but he needs to be the one to resign, so we're not paying him, and we can control where he can go, possibly. And it becomes this big 3-day ugly thing until finally they come to an agreement of, Wink Martindale not keeping the money that he was owed. And that made you less desirable, right? If he just fired Brian Daboll, I think that position, or fired Wink Martindale and just let bygones be bygones, I think that becomes a more desirable position. But they weren't able to get their defensive coordinators they want. They settled on Shane Bowen, and then when it's clear that Shane Bowen is not doing a good job, and the crazy thing is the fourth quarter collapses are a big part of why Brian Daboll's gone. The defensive coordinator is still here, by the way. So the defensive coordinator who is responsible for some of that is still here. They didn't want to fire another defensive coordinator because Brian Daboll didn't know how to hire coaches besides going to, like you said, the best available. When we said in the moment, it's like, if you want to fire him, be innovative. Go to college. Find some linebacker, DB coach, some guy who's, slated to be next, and take him out of his spot early, right? Take a chance on that guy and hope you've got the next best whiz kid and make him your defensive coordinator. But they just stayed with Shane Bowen, and those, that ended up killing him a bit in the end too, because Shane Bowen, the offense has been pretty damn solid under Jackson Dart, right? It hasn't been great, but I think it's been ranked like 17th in the NFL in scoring since Jackson Dart took over, where the defense has been terrible.
Yeah, and I mean, that's an offense that's operating without its best player in Malik Neighbors, its best skill player in Malik Neighbors. So, and at the beginning of the year was operating without its best player, Andrew Thomas. So, yeah, I mean, I think averaging about middle of the pack for an offense is pretty good for a rookie quarterback, and given those constraints. So, yeah, look, I mean, it comes down to the fact that it just appeared to me that Brian Daboll did not care about anything outside of the offense. He was not interested in really, a defensive identity or trying to capture a certain kind of defense. And I think that can set the franchise back, because, you start switching defensive philosophies, then you need different parts to your defense. And then it involves the roster shakeup. So, I mean, that level of not caring is just not good enough for me as a head coach. I understand the want to have like an offensive play caller be your head coach. And I, you know, as we talk a little bit about what Brian Daboll did well, I think that he was pretty good at coming up with an offensive game plan each week, given what he had in all of those moments, right? You know, there are different benchmarks throughout his time here, what with Tommy DeVito as quarterback or what have you. But considering what he had to work with, I thought on a week-to-week basis overall, they did a pretty good job game planning for the offense. And, you know, in that regard, that level of coaching, I thought he did well. But I mean, just to sandwich this right back, I think another thing that he did really, really poorly, and another reason ultimately that he's gone mid-season and not the end of the season, and it's not just because they lost, it's because I don't think that the locker room respected him. There was no level of accountability among the players, and the training camps were super duper easy.
Yep.
And you have guys like Dexter Lawrence doing basically nothing all training camp. Malik Neighbors did basically nothing all training camp. You know, and there's some level of injury for some of that. So like there's a little bit of gray area, but for them to do almost nothing and then, you know, Dexter Lawrence come out cold this year, and there's a million reasons for that too. But, you know, they came out unprepared week one just about every single time except 2022, when there seemed to be a different Brian Daboll in the way he approached the summer and that offseason.
Yeah. So let's like you kind of touched on it. Let's clean up the last things that are like why Daboll's not here, and then I do want to. I will never do a Giants head coach fired episode unless I truly just despise that guy on a lot of levels. If the Giants fired Joe Schoen, you might get that episode without talking about what they did do well, though. So let's clean it up. Like you mentioned, letting things slide, attention to detail. I mean, it drives me nuts when they would, you know, defend things of like, oh, if these two players executed, then the thing would have worked. Well, what about your practices and your coaching style makes you think that all the details are going to be honed in especially from a young raw? What makes you think that? What have you done in preparation to make you think that your second year linebacker, who's a backup, is going to really be honed in on the details and stop Tyler Nubin from getting burnt on a play? And they just did not drill the details. Whether that is defensively, on the offensive side, they just did not care about drop passes. They didn't coach it. Detail, like when you put some freedom in route running, you've got to be detailed on this stuff. And the guys are constantly in the wrong place or not breaking at the right time. You know, defenders' ball skills never really advance. And it led to penalties too. You know, the first 2 years, they're actually pretty decent with penalties. The last 2 years, this year, they have the third most yards per game of penalties. Last year, the eighth most. And no consequences for players when they do screw up, right? The Deontay Banks saga that is never ending of just no consequences for him. You can even say the Jackson Dart, like not taking care of his body is part of that, even though me and you could do a 10-minute rant on why, like, yesterday probably is not the best example of that. Like, he was sliding and they ran like 3 design runs. And even goes back like Xavier McKinney, right? Xavier McKinney was, as much as I wanted Xavier McKinney back, right? I remember saying there's no excuse to not bring him back. He was saying stupid shit after games all the time that year. Stupid. And then it said in that Raiders game where he said like, he said, I can't remember exactly what he said. And it was bullshit. And Wink Martindale met with him and showed him like, what are you talking about? Like, and said it was bullshit. And instead, Daboll didn't do any type of like, you know, coaching on that or punishment, or not even a punishment. It's not deserved, but like nothing. And then just gives McKinney the game ball the next game that they win of like I'm taking your side type of approach to it. And that's when the Wink Martindale stuff really, started to, make news with the Jay Glazer thing. So I think that's a huge part of it. Right. And they didn't coach their best players very well either too. Like they just kind of let them get away with whatever they wanted.
Yeah, I thought what was really telling in all the stories I read today was in Dan Duggan's article with The Athletic said that several players kind of shrugged and were just like, someone needs to be accountable, and suggested that the accountability falls with the head coach. I mean, I think it's pretty rare when players do something like that. Players, plural, and not just like one pain in the ass player, diva, or whatever. When multiple players, kind of feel like the head coach is accountable for the situation of the team, that's an incredibly telling sign that the locker room is completely turned. And like, it's one of those things, right? Like, he seems to be a player's coach. And, that's the way his approach is. And I've just always felt like that only works when you win. As soon as you are not winning and you're not winning consistently, that approach just doesn't work at all. And I guess you could probably say the same thing about a hard-ass coach that's on them for everything under the sun. But it just quickly, it leaves players to police themselves far too much. And when you have a really young roster, which the Giants do have one of the youngest rosters, you're asking young players to step up and be leaders and hold other players accountable, because the head coach not only isn't, but you have plenty of information now showing that isn't going to. Like, this is on us to have to do kind of thing. And it's, when you have that much losing, 3 straight years of losing, I think it's asking too much of a roster.
Yeah. Let's do one last thing before, because, people know why Wink Martindale's far. Last thing I'll say is I don't necessarily blame him fully for this, as part of it is, and I think this is where the front office is, they're going to blame him lack of development, right? Why has only Kayvon, Cordell Flott, and McFadden really made jumps as draft picks, right? While other guys have stalled out, right? Now, part of that is rookies were overrated, but at the same time, overrated rookies should develop some, right? Where Evan Neal, Azudu, Banks, JMS, Hyatt, Newman, and Drew Phillips are all guys who have kind of stalled out from where they were in year one. Here's what he did do well, though. And there's other things we could talk about, lack of aggression, blah, blah, blah. I think he consistently designed his offenses to his quarterback's strengths and adapted time after time after time. Really the only quarterback they weren't able to do that with was Russell Wilson. And even then, I think it's just Russ is washed. Like, they called, besides week 1, they called an offense for Russell Wilson, and only the Cowboys were stupid enough to not defend it. But like what they did around rookie Tommy DeVito was honestly unbelievable, right? They obviously needed some help from Wink Martindale in those games, but they did a fantastic job working around him and being like, this guy's going to take sacks. So let's just go big game hunting and play action and hope we can get enough points at the end of the day. The playoff run with Daniel Jones was real. Obviously, they did not get the most out of Daniel Jones in the 2 seasons following, but like they got him to play well enough to where they paid him, and they changed. Like, that year offensively was beautiful because they changed their offensive identity 3 times, right? They came into the season aggressive, gung-ho. This is what I want the Brian Daboll offense to be. They were able to score some points a little bit. They even started 2-0, but the offense didn't look good, so they adjusted, right? They went 2 tight ends, run heavy, under center, play action, right? Awesome. Middle teams caught up to that. So what did they do? They went to spread it out a little more. We're going to get Saquon involved by throwing him quick passes. We're going to work quick game. And they were able to do that and win a playoff game and have the 15th ranked offense with a bad offensive line, a bad wide receiver group. Tyrod Taylor, they had him playing, one of the more conservative quarterbacks historically, as aggressive as anybody in the league, creating explosive plays in the passing game. And then when you get to this year, Jackson Dart, 17 touchdowns in 7 games, 23.5 points per game, without Malik Neighbors and a rookie QB who was seen as raw. And he was the one who banged the table for Jackson Dart. I know the Giants are going to push back of like the narrative that Joe Schoen didn't want Jackson Dart. And there is no definitive proof of that. But here's something that's proof. Jackson Dart was Brian Daboll's guy more than he was anybody else's guy. That is what we do know. And he was the one who went with it. And it wasn't an easy decision. In hindsight, it looks like a very smart decision, but it was not looked at like that in the moment, including by myself. But he found concepts that worked with Dart, molded them consistently, and with all his quarterbacks to get open. It was never my complaint of Brian Daboll of guys being schemed open. But at the end of the day, he's not an offensive coordinator as a head coach. But I did think that was – I never went into a game being like, we're just not going to be able to scheme this up on offense. There was games where that happened, but I never really went into a game with that mindset.
I don't think I can really blame Brian Daboll for a lack of development of players. I think that too often players being bad gets blamed on coaches, and there's not enough emphasis on the players just being good themselves, or if players were picked with the right coach in mind, where you have a disconnect between GM and head coach, which I think we saw for the majority of Jerry Reese and Tom Coughlin's time together. You can kind of point at that. I think in general, either the players themselves that were picked were not very good picks, or, in the case of somebody like Evan Neal, like I just think a lot of it is just Evan Neal's fault that Evan Neal is not good, So
Agreed.
I don't think that the development of players is bad. And I also think that
there's conversations with guys like Newman and Phillips.
Sure.
I'm trying to
Which,
think
I think you have like a
player.
residual effect on Newman. Like I think Shane Bowen not being a very good coach probably hinders Tyler Newman's development, and Shane Bowen being coach is kind of Brian Daboll's fault. So if you want to do like the transitory, process of who's at fault there, then I guess you can tag that to Daboll. But, I think in general, Daboll was pretty good at coaching up his players and getting the best. Like you said, like in games in which I felt there was like a competitive roster situation, there was a chance for us to win. Yeah, I would agree with
that. So let's transition to Mike Kafka being the interim coach, which is like the thing I have the least amount of takes on. And if you want to go see Mike Kafka be the head coach of the New York Giants, you need to go to SeatGeek. I know there's probably a lot of Packers fans who are going to be going to SeatGeek this week. And I'm, you know what? I kind of thrive within the chaos. I'm actually a little excited to go to that Commanders game in a month and see you there.
Well, don't forget either the interim head coach thing.
Yeah, we got a lot to talk. That's going to be more of a preview pod conversation. But this episode is brought to you by SeatGeek, which is, again, thanks to SeatGeek for being a huge supporter of the show. Hey, they were the sponsor of my old show when they hired Brian Daboll. And it's funny, you're doing the show on the road, Grump. When the Giants hired Brian Daboll, I was literally driving to an Orlando Magic game, and they hired Brian Daboll. So we drove to my girlfriend's house, who's now my wife at the time, and did it in her did that podcast in her room. Go look it up. What does that have to do? I bought my Orlando Magic tickets on SeatGeek. So the NFL and college football are in full swing. The NBA is officially back. So is hockey. There are more than 70,000 events listed on SeatGeek, including concerts, sports, festivals, and more. And with over 28 million downloads, SeatGeek is the #1 rated ticketing app. Wow. I love using SeatGeek. I already use it to get my Commanders tickets. Go get yours now. Come see us. SeatGeek has your back. Each ticket is rated on a scale of 1 to 10. So you're getting a good deal. So look for the green dots. Green means good. Red means bad. It's just like freaking traffic, baby. Plus, every ticket is backed by their buyer guarantee. And of course, I have a code for you guys. You can use code Bobby2025 for 10% off your next set of tickets at SeatGeek. That's 10% off any tickets with promo code Bobby2025. Make sure you click the link in the description to download the app and have the code automatically added to your account so you can use it later. Thank you, SeatGeek. You'll be glad you did.
You'll be glad you did.
Be glad you did. So let's talk Mike Kafka before we get to what I think is actually the more juicy part of the episode, and that is the Joe Schoen.
Well, Mike Kafka is the obvious choice for interim head coach, right? Is he? I guess not.
Here's why I think he is. Because he's been interviewed for head coaching jobs all of the last 3 seasons. If you're looking for the interim coach spark, I don't think Mike Kafka is the type of guy to get that. I think Mike Kafka is obviously the best suited on the staff to be a head coach. But if you're looking for the interim coach spark, you go like Michael Gabriel, the special teams coordinator, or something like that. They don't really have like the position coach of like a Dan Campbell. Andre Patterson could maybe do that, right? He's so respected and is viewed as very wise. But I am okay with it, even though like the Jets last year when they made Jeff Ulbrich the interim coach, I didn't like that. Here's what I'll say. I don't think this should be viewed as a tryout for Mike Kafka. What are they going to do? Go 3-4 in their last 7 games and think, oh, well, there's only one issue on our team, and it was Mike Kafka. I mean, like, obviously, maybe he hires a new defensive coordinator, but like that definitely, it would have to be this man have to move heaven and earth for me to think like, oh, you know what, he should be the head coach at the end of the season, right?
I mean, number one, is Mike Kafka interested in the job? I mean, it is. We'll talk about the job first. It's an attractive spot to land. There's a lot of stuff to talk about, but I understand the GM, and we're going to talk about that. But there is
it's not as attractive as it could be, but I agree.
Okay, probably true. But you have a situation where you will most likely have choice of the entire staff, right? So you're probably going to be hiring all new coordinators across the board. Special teams, maybe he stays, Michael Gobriel. But you have plenty of cap space in 2026 and 2027. The highest cap hit guys are the best players on the team. So you don't have like heavy weight in the future that you have to deal with. And you have a guy with Jackson Dart that you probably feel like you can win with. Mike Kafka already has a good relationship with him. So, I mean, that's probably a little bit attractive. But otherwise, most of Mike Kafka's time here has to have been pretty miserable. So it wouldn't shock me if he just had no interest in being in this position the moment he can get the hell out of here. That really wouldn't shock me at all.
At the same time, I think he would take a head coaching job if offered at the end of the season. But again, I think Mike Kafka is just a placeholder to get to the end of the season. I know there's probably some people in the building who believe Kafka could be the head coach, but I'm just not really entertaining the idea of him being on a tryout. Like, get through these next 7 games, but like this coaching staff needs to be cleaned out, right? Like I think essentially everyone needs to be replaced except for like Carmen Brasillo, and you could say whoever else, but like. If you're going to do this, you need to have a full coaching reset, not just moving people up one spot in the organization. The Giants have done that, and it's failed, with Ben McAdoo. Also, Kafka, as much as I like Kafka, he doesn't inspire me as a head coach either, right? We saw him
that's the thing, like
Senior Bowl a little bit. People didn't like that. That's a very small sample size to judge, but it's just I also am not motivated by Mike Kafka to be a head coach either, even though I think he's a pretty good coach in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty difficult to assess Mike Kafka as an offensive coordinator, and it always has been under Brian Daboll because it looked like Brian Daboll had his hooks in the offense, right. And at some point, like in every facet of the offense, we were like, does Mike Kafka do shit around here? Like, it was really, really difficult to tell what he did. So it's really hard for me to imagine Mike Kafka as a head coach when I'm not really 100% sure what he is as an offensive coordinator. I think he's okay. Yeah. But like I said, it's hard to tell what to give him credit for. It's hard to tell what to blame him for.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the first things he had to do when he got here was learn the playbook, right? That's usually not how an offensive coordinator who's calling plays goes about things, but like
exactly.
So I think he did a fairly good job with the playbook, and there were little wrinkles he would add, and I thought that went away last year when he wasn't the play caller. But like I said, I'm not in there. Let's read the Giants statement and then talk about Joe Schoen, because Joe Schoen was always going to be a topic of this conversation, but the Giants made him almost the focal point in my head of this conversation, even though it's 37 minutes and we haven't talked about him. So this is what the Giants put out. Now, they didn't put all of this out on their screenshot statement. In fact, here's their screenshot statement. I should have saved this and put it up on the screen, but whatever. The Giants announced, you know what? I'm gonna do it for the people who are watching live. I'm gonna do a little present screen. So let's do present screen. The New York Giants announced today that head coach Brian Daboll has been relieved of his duties. Assistant head coach, offensive coordinator Mike Kafka will serve as interim head coach. We spoke this morning about the direction of our franchise on the field, and we have decided that at this time it is our best interest to make a change at the head coaching position. I lost my place. President John Mara and Chairman Steve Tisch said in a joint statement, which I guess both aren't really doing also hot. The past few seasons have been nothing short of disappointing, and we have not met our expectations with this franchise. We understand the frustration of our fans, and we will deliver a significantly improved product. We appreciate Coach Daboll for contributions to this organization. We wish Daboll the best. We wish the Daboll family all the best in the future. Now let's share the statement, right? So this whole part right here, we went through. All right. Here's what these slime balls didn't put out on Twitter. Joe Schoen remains in his position as general manager and will lead the search for a new head coach. We feel like Joe has assembled a good young nucleus of talent, and we look forward to his development, said Mara. Unfortunately, the results over the past 3 years have not been what any of us want. We take full responsibility for those results and look forward to the kind of success our fans need. These are difficult decisions, and John Mara and I do not take them lightly, said Tisch, but we feel like this is the right thing to do at this time, allow us to move forward. And then it chronicles Daboll and Kafka. So that's what they put out. Let me fix the screen for us. I do want to say this. it is not impossible that this works out with Joe Schoen. And this is not going to be my full thoughts of everything fleshed out on Joe Schoen, right? That will come at a later time. But we are left relying on hope, Grump. And it's again, man, where I feel myself saying this at the end of seasons or in the middle of season, where I'm like, man, I hate relying on hope and not having an actual plan. Like, this can work out, but the risk far outweighs the reward. Like, there is a chance that Joe Schoen hires a rock star head coach and the picks and free agency become much better. They truly turn it around, but you're risking a lot for a guy who really hasn't proven anything, because a quote unquote good young nucleus should not be the standard for someone who just fired the coach that he petitioned to keep and is going into year 5. That shouldn't be the standard. Okay, that should not be the standard. And you're risking some things. The head coaching candidate may not want to join here because of the mess that the Giants are on with Joe Schoen, the way he's viewed in league circles, about how slimy he may be and cozying up to the right people, and the way he backstabbed Brian Daboll. One, he hasn't been a good GM. You may like some of the pieces. Bad GMs have good players. Dave Gettleman had some good players as the Giants GM. That did not make him a good general manager. They're the same mistake of putting all their issues on Daniel Jones last year, which was not true. And they're doing the same thing over and again. The same mistake when we spend all offseason talking about, like, what if things could break right, and for them to not do that. That's what they are doing again. And here is the argument. Well, they could be 5-5 with competent coaching against the Cowboys, Broncos, and Bears. Okay, the Cowboys one, I agree with you. I agree with you. Like, that end of game defense by Shane Bowen was embarrassing. But I'm also not proud of almost beating a Cowboys team that's only wins are against the Giants, Jets, and the Commanders. The Broncos game became an issue when Paulson Adebo went out, and the teams just started throwing at Deontay Banks and Drew Phillips, and they kept running the ball, right? Run defense is a huge part of this defense, and Shane Bowen has coached the number 1 run defense. Wink Martindale had coached the number 1 run defense. It's a personnel issue. Yes, there are some coaching mistakes, but it's mostly on Shane's picks and lack of defense for running that. The Bears game was because Russell Wilson went in for Jackson Dart. Joe Schoen didn't even want to bench Russell Wilson when they did. So I'm not putting that all on coaching. And Schoen is a part of these collapses as well, right? Coaching is a very big part of it, but Schoen is a part of it too. And also, who is the coach that is more to blame for these? The defensive coordinator who they did not fire. They didn't fire Shane Bowen. So how could you play as, the end of game collapses when Shane Bowen is a huge part of that? And I do not play the if game on why they're good at their job, right? You can say if they don't blow those 3 games, they'd be 5-5, but that doesn't mean they're a well-built team, because I can play the if game too. If the Chargers offensive line doesn't get massacred and the Eagles from week 8 show up in week 6, then you're 0-10. Do you want to play that if game? So it works both ways, not just when you want it to. So I want to talk about self-evaluation and too much of a reliance on hope to figure things out. And again, it's not impossible, but it's risky. You're putting yourself at way too much risk. You're risking having Jackson Dart dealing with more and more firings by not just cleaning house and starting fresh, right? You're risking the fact that, hey, maybe they do get a really good head coach and Jackson Dart continues to be really good, but Joe Schoen doesn't do a good job, and you're having eternal playoff exits because you stuck with that guy. So you're just risking way too much, in my opinion, for a guy who doesn't deserve it.
Yeah, I mean, you really said it all.
I think it took me 40 minutes to get fired up.
Yeah, so there's other conversations in there too that we're not even talking about, and it's one that I actually hate. Is like Joe Schoen's drafts are bad, and like there's so much more to GMing than the draft, and I think that Joe Schoen's drafts are kind of average, if we're being honest. You're right. The fact that there is a good, quote unquote, good young nucleus, even if that is subjective, it's not good enough. I mean, like, there are good players acquired by GMs almost by accident. You have enough picks in the top 15 and you're going to acquire good players. That just happens. I understand why Shane Bowen wasn't fired at the same time as Brian Daboll, especially since you're going to, Mike Kafka is an interim head coach. That's putting a lot on an interim head coach at an early point in the season. I consider this an early point in the season to get rid of a head coach. If there's 3 games left, then maybe it doesn't matter anymore. But with the amount of time left, I'm not totally surprised. There's a lot to not like about Joe Schoen, but I do think that there are some reasons why he is still here at this point today, which, who knows at the end of the season. But at this point today, Joe Schoen is still here and Brian Daboll is not. It did feel like even if the Giants were in a game where they were in control and they were winning, there was a chance for them to lose, or a chance that, if they were in a competitive situation where, they have a good roster and now they're in the playoffs, it didn't feel to me that we had a shot to win. There was any advantage that Brian Daboll was going to, if anything, I was worried about some in-game decisions that he would make that would cost us the game. Some wacky, stupid challenge or just like bad time management, misuse of timeouts that lose you the game, but at least with Joe Schoen, he does have some things in his corner that, the roster is improved from when he took over, albeit only slightly, and
Congrats.
with definite problems along the way that we could talk about ad nauseum. And I'm with you. And the other thing is that he did inherit an incredibly terrible cap situation. And despite giving a contract to Daniel Jones that set them back, the contract are in a good place in 2026 and 2027, where, I highlighted this before. There are only a couple of big contracts and they're all going to the best players on the team. So there's no heavy weight preventing you from being flexible in the future. So he does have those 2 things in his corner that he can directly show the ownership as him doing his job and, the coaches not doing their job, that they have a lot less to show. And I would say, to his credit too, the offensive line that we're happy with today is the offensive line that he did have assembled last year, and they all just got hurt. So we didn't, perhaps the perception of what Joe Schoen has done in terms of a roster, that he's built, we'd have a different opinion of it if we knew that the offensive line, for sure, concrete with evidence, was good last year as well. Now, I'm not saying that these things make him anything more than an average GM, but they are points in his favor. And, I think that what gets lost is, especially when you get to the point of this is the 3rd time that John Mara has fired a head coach and retained a GM, there is something different about Joe Schoen and his hiring. He is the first one where this is an outside of the box hire for John Mara. He is not part of the Giants family whatsoever. And when, I would assume that a condition upon hiring him, somewhere in the interview process, Joe Schoen said, you need to completely rethink the way that you are handling your roster. They completely gutted the scouting department. They installed all this new equipment. Jerry Reese was a foundational piece that moved up through the ranks of the Giants family. Dave Gettleman, even though he came from Carolina, where he was pretty much kicked out, was someone who grew up within the Giants family. Joe Schoen, I kind of felt like this was a little bit not surprising because of how much of a culture shift, I guess you could say, he came with when he came in here. Like, they weren't going to just throw the entire process out. They knew that this was more of a long-term process sort of situation when he came in. So as much as I may agree or disagree with it, I could see the points in his favor, whereas it's really difficult for me to see things for Brian Daboll.
Well, Brian Daboll, there was just no way to get out of the rut that he created. Where Joe Schoen, you can say this is the way to get out of it, and part of that is firing Brian Daboll. And again, I do not want to turn this into. Plus, trust me, we got 7 weeks. There will be full conversations talking about every defense and thing against Joe Schoen. The idea that, and here's a thing that bothers me a little bit. It's not even the thought that Joe Schoen may be safe. It's the fact that I talk to people and they're like, yeah, Joe Schoen's really safe. And this is, over a week ago and stuff. I'm like, yeah, but there's 8 games left, right? I lock him. Like, no, I'm telling you, he's safe, right? And the Giants have basically confirmed all that this week with what they've leaked out to the media, and then what they said themselves today. And again, I can go after every Joe Schoen argument. I'm not going to do that fully on this episode, but he deserves a ton of blame for the way that this team is. And I'm not doing the whole, well, if they don't blow 3 games, they're 5-5. We stop playing the if game. The if game has us where you are here. And I will say, fans play the if game, right? Like, that's what, like, why should we live in total misery of like, it's going to go wrong? Like, like hope for the best case scenario. I don't want to say to don't do that, but like, you're just relying on hope. They're running $1 billion, $10 billion organization. They're relying on hope, right? Like the Giants' fatal flaw. What does everyone say the Giants' fatal flaw has been since they fell from grace after those Super Bowls? They don't know how to evaluate themselves, and they just rely on hope too much. It's their fatal flaw. Also like, and also I want to say this, like, oh, well, if they only, if they didn't collapse, they're in those games. Okay, but like, does Brian Daboll get no credit for getting Jackson Dart developed to be in those games? Because if they stayed with Russell Wilson, they're not in any of those games except for the Dallas game, right? If they stay with Russell Wilson, they win 1 game.
Well, and on the flip side, if you're going to be blaming Brian Daboll for a lot of stuff, like you're the GM that brought him in here, so like
he fought to bring him back,
yeah.
Right? John Mara was okay with firing him last year, and Joe Schoen, like that's again. So that's another thing negative on Joe Schoen's resume is that bad head coach. You fought to bring him back after year 3. He did that. That wasn't John Mara. That was him who fought for him. So, but again, I turned my lights back on. My eyes were getting like all bugged out. Like they don't self-evaluate well. It's why Shane and Daboll returned in the first place, right? They hope they could turn around. It's why Shane Bowen to return. It's why Jalen Hyde and Evan Neal are still in the roster. It's why the kicker situation is a joke. It's why their offensive line totally fell apart in 2023. It's why Deonte Banks continues to cost them games. They don't evaluate, and they just hope for the best, right? They act as fans, right? Where as fans, we should be relying on hope, right? What else do we have if we don't have hope? But they operate their business like that, where it's like, well, if we just if these things don't go bad and these things go better than what might be expected, well, then we could be pretty good, right? So also, this is going to become a conference. We could close on this. Part of the conversation is going to be the Giants structure of the organization right now, with John Mara dealing with obvious health concerns. I think Steve Tisch is not doing super hot either, and I think it's been that way for a while. So if you're asking for Steve Tisch to get more involved, you're probably swinging and missing there. I think there's a reason why he hasn't talked to media since 2019. There's gonna be floated out. John Mara's health issues don't put them in a place where they can do a GM search. If that's the case, you are not a ice cream shop down the road putting off addition of Baskin Robbins to your flavors available to people. This is a $10 billion. You were just valued at $10 million, and you probably have a higher value than that. You cannot operate that way. If John Mara is not in a place to do it, somebody needs to be placed in charge. John Mara was healthy enough to say that Brian Daboll should be fired. You need to have someone in charge. Now, part of that issue, Grump, is that the people that might be assuming charge right now with John Mara not being part of the day-to-day is Shane has become buddy-buddy with those guys, right? Maybe not Chris Mara, but other guys. And guess what? They're not going to go and tell John Mara that we should fire this guy. One, they're buddy-buddy with them. And let's talk about self-preservation. Can Tim McDonald, does he really want to have another GM fired and have his job to be more scrutinized and then be kept around for a new GM? I don't think so. So people tell me that, Joe has cozied up to the right people. People see them out together consistently. Plus, there's a people in the building that are gullible. So it's not to say that I have faith. If John Mara was in charge, and I don't have faith. In fact, where it's if Chris Mara was doing the GM search instead of John Mara, would I feel any worse about that? I don't know. John Mara's done a pretty damn bad job of it already. So I'm just don't let them do that. There's way too much at stake to just say, well, Mara's sick, they can't do it. That cannot be the excuse for keeping all of this in place. That cannot be the excuse.
Do you think it will be?
I think it's part of it. I don't think it will.
I mean, do you think that that's going to be released
through the media? Yes, they're not going to directly say that. But that it's not even I think. That is what is being said.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean you're right. Like this isn't a mom and pop shop. It's a huge industry, and it's nice and it's cute that, you know, it's a family business and it's one of the few or whatever, but like it's not an ice cream store. Like you have to run this professionally, and there are so many jobs involved. You know, if somebody's not capable of making decisions that need to make those, like it's an ownership decision. If he's not in the capacity to act as owner, then there needs to be like a lieutenant owner that makes all of those decisions. Either he has the capacity or he doesn't. And that really is the long and short of it. So, you know, it shouldn't be the excuse. I mean, if you want to roll with Shane, then I guess your excuse has to be, I really do think that, you know, this is.
I bet you come out and speak and talk about not John Mayer, but Joe Schoen.
Ducking the interviews is huge.
It's what a joke, dude. That's where we could finish off. They're going to send Mike Kafka. Mike Kafka is going to be the first person to answer for this. That's gross. That is pathetic. That is coward. That's cowardly. That this guy, Mike Kafka, now he's an NFL head coach, and he's got to deal with. He doesn't get to start 0-0, right? He gets to start 2-8. With everybody pissed off, and now you going to send him to the wolves and the players in the locker room afterwards. That's embarrassing. They have time to change that and have Joe Schoen be made available, but it's a joke. They're a coward. They can't defend themselves. They know that Joe Schoen cannot go out there and defend himself without sounding stupid.
Yeah, and it's terrible too, because you have Mike Kafka, who is we went through is like, is he the best choice? There's only two real options here, really. Maybe three if you want to count Andre Patterson. But you went with a guy who is a first-time head coach at this point. He's 38 years old, and we're not even sure how much of, how involved he was last year in terms of an offensive coordinator, et cetera. So, like, this is the situation you put him in. He's inheriting a rudderless locker room that is not accountable. You have players running out back doors to avoid things. I saw a report, I don't know how true it was, of someone screaming in Shane Bowen's face, a player screaming in Shane Bowen's face. I don't know if that's true at all. But just in general, I mean, you have Brian Burns throwing tantrums. You know what I mean? Like that. This is what he's inheriting. This is his first shot as a 38-year-old. That really is, and all just for people who are culpable and have a hand in this mess. To not face the music is pretty weak.
Yep, it's pathetic. It's pathetic. Anything else before we go? You want to give us your top 20 coaches candidates before we go?
No. I'm not going to give a top 20. Although
it can't be a coordinator, even though like every head coaching candidate is a coordinator.
Well, I mean, I guess I just want to end on this. That this is our reaction with the notes that we had already compiled. We're going to be hearing more leaks from the faucet, I think, throughout the next couple of weeks, especially at the end of the year. And this is not a comprehensive breakdown of Joe Schoen or Brian Daboll. This is just, what we've had assembled getting ready for this and what we learned today. So, if there's some part of this that we didn't talk about, I guarantee you it's going to be covered in the future.
Yeah, I don't think we're doing much of a preview of the Packers game on Friday. I think we're going to be, debriefing everything that has happened in the 3 days after this episode. So 9 a.m. tomorrow, Breaking Big Blue with Jordan Renan. So make sure to tune in for that. I'm sure we'll get some information out of that. Appreciate you guys for joining. This is the first firing of the Giants Nation show era. Truly love this show, even the Giants make it frustrating. Grump, appreciate you. Appreciate all the listeners. So again, if you're listening for the first time, which I know there are people, congrats to making it to the end. You either are like, these guys suck, or you're just in it for life and you're going to be watching film reviews and just seeing us be stupid.
So and subscribe.
Yeah, like and subscribe. Don't subscribe and then like it, then subscribe. And I always say subscribe. And if you don't like us in a week, unsubscribe. Very simple. Like, I'll give you that option. All right, we will see you guys when we see you. Until then, let's go Big Blue.